Moving on to our top story. Now, with the deadline to comply with new government regulations having passed, Twitter issued a statement expressing concern over use of intimidation tactics by the police against their staff in India. Twitter spoke of a collective responsibility to safeguard public interest. The government hit back and hard, telling Twitter to disabuse itself of this grandiosity and comply with the law of the land. Rahul Srivastava, our National Affairs Editor, with our big focus story tonight.
It's the government versus the world's most popular microblogging site. On Thursday, even as the IT ministry sought compliance reports from social media companies, Twitter went public with a statement that got the government all riled up. The social media app said that it is trying to keep free speech intact and is concerned about the intimidation tactics used by police. The microblogging site further added that it is critical to adopt a collaborative approach and that the company will strive to comply with the law of the land. The IT ministry came out with an angry and aggressive retort. The government said it was not the social media platform's prerogative to ensure free speech. It lashed out at Twitter, saying the site was trying to dictate terms to the world's largest democracy and undermining India's legal system. The statement even said Twitter was trying to defame India.
हम तो सिर्फ उन लोगों की आवाज जिनकी आवाज यहाँ दब जाती है इसको कहते हुए कि हमको प्रोटेक्शन है। भाई आपको प्रोटेक्शन है, लेकिन आपको कंप्लायंस को भी तो देखना पड़ेगा कि कंप्लाई आप जो कंप्लेन जो आ रहे हैं उसका रेजोल्यूशन आप देख कर रहे हैं कि नहीं, इसमें कौन सी गलत बात है?
The government Twitter war erupted a day after WhatsApp dragged the government to court, saying the new IT laws would impinge on the privacy of its users. The centre countered the argument, saying while it respected privacy, national security comes first.
एक ही चीज लड़ाई जा सकती है अगेंस्ट द लॉ, विच इज ए सिटीजन्स कॉन्स्टिट्यूशनल राइट. अगर उस पे कहीं किसी तरीके का सिटीजन का राइट बनता है तो सिटीजन कैन फाइट दैट. प्राइवेट कंपनीज हैव नो लोकस टू फाइट that kind of law which protects the right of the user.
Facebook has sought more engagement with the government while assuring that it will begin the process for compliance. Tech giant Google said it had consistently invested in personnel to combat illegal content. For now, all social media platforms have been given 15 days by the government to show compliance with the new set of IT rules. Bureau Report, India Today.
Twitter spoke of a potential threat to freedom of expression and raised concerns about intimidation tactics. Is there merit in Twitter's concerns, or has the Narendra Modi government drawn the Lakshman Rekha? A US-based private for-profit company cannot not comply with the law of the land and should disabuse itself of its grandiosity. Joining me on India First is Adil Singh Boparai, spokesperson of the Congress Party, also an eminent lawyer. R.P. Singh, spokesperson of the Bharatiya Janata Party. Sajan Povaiya is a senior advocate. He has represented social media companies and microblogging sites in the past. And Ambassador Vishnu Prakash is a seasoned diplomat, was the voice of the External Affairs Ministry. And R.P. Singh, I want to begin by asking you. Twitter says the new IT rules have elements that inhibit free conversation. Twitter works on principles of transparency and to empower people. Sending police to Twitter office was intimidating their staff in India, sir.
Gaurav, let's understand, is Twitter a publishing house? Is Twitter a telecasting company? Or is it an intermediary? If it is intermediary, then they have no right to make all this noise. Then they have to follow the guidelines of intermediary. They can't dictate that which tweet will go, which tweet will not go. Let it be free for all. But
the question is bigger. The question is that they are talking about freedom of press. Well, what did happen when 26th January happened and at Red Fort, people were there and all that was telecasted on Twitter?
Okay.
They never banned that, they never had a question. But yes, When it happened at Capitol Hill, they banned it. I mean, they banned Trump. So why this selective thing?
Okay.
And also,
so you're
who
raising
gave
the
them
issue.
right? Who,
You're
give me-
raising
give
the
me a
issue.
second, another second,
Are they an
another second,
intermediary
another second,
or are they a
another second,
publisher?
Gaurav, another second. And Twitter is not an FBI. Twitter is not an investigating agency. They will not decide what is right or wrong. But they are just a platform. They have to decide whether they have to stay as a platform or they have to turn into a publishing house or a telecasting agency.
Sergeant Povaiya, you heard the BJP's contention. Is Twitter a publisher or is Twitter an intermediary? And either ways, does it not have to comply with the rules or challenge them in a court of law the way WhatsApp did?
No, absolutely. I think it's the question of whether they are a publisher, not a publisher, etc., in my humble opinion, is irrelevant. The question is that for an intermediary, there is a set of rules that are to be complied by an intermediary. What does the intermediary have? They have two options: either comply, or if you believe that these rules are actually intrusive, challenge them in a court of law, get an order of stay and say, I will not comply until the stay order is vacated, or if the court strikes down the rule. So it does. For example, the Supreme Court of India struck down Section 66A of the Information Technology Act simply because it was intrusive.
Yes.
Now the question is, I think we should really modulate this discourse to the level of what it is. The question is not whether Twitter as an intermediary is attempting to control governance mechanism in this country, or for that matter, any intermediary can. The answer simply is it can't. You have a sovereign democratic republic. The republic has actually promulgated a law and there are a set of rules. Every intermediary wanting to operate in this jurisdiction must comply with the rules. And if they find that the rules are not in consonance with their business model or constitutional rights, they are free to challenge it. Now, the question is not about whether the rules are right or wrong, because Twitter, for example, is not in court, whereas WhatsApp is in court. There are many other entities like LiveLaw, etc., which have gone to court. The question is, because the new rules mandate that you should have physical presence in this country in terms of your chief compliance officer, resident grievance officer, and a nodal officer, simply because you don't comply with the rule, hypothetically, let me assume that an intermediary has not complied with the rule. Can you, the state machinery, use police force to land up at the doorstep of these officials who are present in India and therefore intimidate them? The question is, I don't think any democratic republic or government should use police machinery to intimidate or browbeat any entity into complying the law.
Fair enough.
If the entity does not comply the law, you have to prosecute that entity. Go ahead and prosecute it.
Okay. Adil Singh Boparai, is the Delhi police going to serve notice to Twitter, intimidation tactics or standard procedure? And is there merit in the government saying Twitter has to comply with the law of the land?
Well, Gaurav, first and foremost, the Bharatiya Janata Party is attempting to strangulate democracy in this country. They're seeking to stop the oxygen supply to our body politic by stifling and suppressing free speech. Now, one has to be extremely naive to believe that this is about enforcement of laws or rules. No, it is not. It is about sending a message. These are browbeating tactics. These are intimidation tactics. The Bharatiya Janata Party over the past 6 months has generated unprecedented and palpable level of anger and repulsion. Social media giants have called them out for their forgery and manipulation, for their fabrication. This is an attempt to arm twist and browbeat them.
Okay.
Now, coming to the merits of these rules, the basic.
I'll come to the merits of the rules. Let me get Ambassador Vishnu Prakash also. And if I can also come back to you subsequently on the point. Is Twitter, as RP Singh posed that question, perhaps, is Twitter the Federal Bureau of Investigation? What is Twitter's mechanism to investigate a matter? But Ambassador Vishnu Prakash, in your view, is there merit in Twitter feeling intimidated by Delhi police personnel landing on the doorstep to serve a notice? And can that be the reason not to comply with rules?
Good evening, Gaurav. The Republic of Twitter has two standards. One for itself, one for the country it comes from, and one for the rest of the world. I am so grateful to the mighty Twitter, and through you would like to convey our gratitude of the nation, that they have said that they will strive to comply with the applicable laws in India. My God, I mean, I'm humbled that they will strive to comply. Frankly, these companies are partisan, they're arbitrary and arrogant. Now, you see, let's face facts. It's a commercial organization. It's not an altruistic outfit. It is using India as a profit center. So my question, and I have a legal background too, is can Twitter arrogate the authority to itself to be the arbiter? What is the framework of reference? Who decides to flag a tweet? What is the basis? Can they be anonymous? Because it tantamounts to a penalty.
Okay.
Was due process followed? So basically, as far as I am concerned, it reeks of double standards. And for Twitter to say that they are the upholder of transparency, freedom of information, etc., is frankly woolly-mouthed and nothing more, nothing less.
Okay. Sergeant Pavaya, the points that are being raised, if we were to specifically talk about flagging of certain tweets as manipulated media, should there be transparency? How did Twitter do that? And if Delhi police is going to get that information while investigating the case on the basis of a complaint made by the Congress party, how is that intimidation, sir?
No,
if Twitter is not
you are
responding to Delhi police's request to come forward with information.
Completely, absolutely, yes. Let's be clear about one thing. The issue of whether a law enforcement machinery can call for information and receive information from an intermediary is not new. It is not under the 2021 rules. The 2011 guidelines under the Information Technology Act of 2000 had exactly the same scenario, saying that if there is a notice issued by the law enforcement authority to any intermediary regarding an ongoing investigation, the intermediary will provide material, number one. Number two, if there is a governmental order by the right authority and or a court order asking an intermediary to pull down particular content, they will have to pull down that content. Shreya Singh's decision of the Supreme Court is unequivocal about it.
Yes.
Therefore, the question is this. That's why I said the discourse today should not really come on to saying, oh, is Twitter actually reaching beyond the government? Oh, or is the present government simply because it's a BJP government against Twitter? I think those aspects are really irrelevant. What is the case? There is a set of rules that have come in. Those rules expected intermediaries to comply with the thresholds that the rules mandate in 3 months. Some have challenged it, some have complied with it, and they have said so. Some have not complied with it and are indicating that these rules are possibly intrusive. So I believe as a lawyer that if anybody believes that a set of rules or laws are intrusive, they have to go and challenge it in a court of law.
Okay.
They cannot stand outside and then say that, no, your rule is not right and therefore I will not comply with it.
And then claim that they are the ones who will talk about freedom of expression. But RP Singh, you heard Adil Singh Boparai. Opposition, social media platforms, they fear that government's definition of what is sedition. Opposition says when kin, for example, asking for medicines or oxygen, your government may see that as sedition tomorrow. Look at Adil Singh Boparai raising the point that there's so much revulsion if it comes out on social media. Your government says take it down. How will Twitter take it down just on the basis of the government asking for it to be done so, sir?
Well, Gaurav, I'll answer that, but first let me address what Adil talked about democracy and murder of democracy. So who's talking about murder of democracy? I've suffered emergency, sir. The freedom, individual freedom, the media, the press, the freedom of the judiciary, press, individual was all down to the earth. I mean, they were dropped to the ground. We all know that. So don't talk about democracy. And you were part of that, Gaurav, when Rajiv Gandhi brought 87 or 88 that press postage bill, which could have strangled the freedom of press.
But let's talk about what's happening today.
No, I'm coming to that, sir. I was just referring to what Adil said about democracy. But coming to the point, sir, who's stopping? They can every day, Mr. Rahul Gandhi tweets something else. We have no issue on that. But issue is when there is something like Khalistan being propagated on Twitter, they want to divide country, and Twitter allows that. There's a gentleman named Ravi Singh Khalsa. Sorry, he's part of the Khalsa head, but his tweets, please, I will appreciate. Track those tweets and you understand what's happening on Twitter. Then how can you allow someone to raise a slogan as country and talk about disintegrating this country? I mean, I will not appreciate, neither others will appreciate. Someone will talk about disintegrating the country. And then on WhatsApp also, sir, WhatsApp will go to a court. Let me refer to that. Sir, tomorrow, There's a plan which been drafted about Pentagon. Will America allow that? Is some plan of Pentagon be leaked on WhatsApp and circulated? Will America allow that? No. So there is something which is, we are only saying, you be your own guide. I mean, you be your own people who check. You do your own policing. But
Adil Singh Boparai,
put check and balances within your system.
Okay. The government in its statement has given specific instances. Double standards adopted by Twitter. Ambassador Vishnu Prakash spoke of it. RP Singh spoke of it. Capitol Hill violence versus Red Fort violence. Twitter not following rules, not taking down stuff that India wants it to take down. So why should Twitter not appoint a nodal officer in India or a grievance officer or a compliance officer if it is so concerned about rights in India?
Gaurav, let me throw some light on the hypocrisy and the duplicity of the BJP. Perhaps Ambassador Prakash and RP Singh Sahab can comment on it. Do they find people, do they justify arresting Indian citizens for putting up posters seeking accountability against Narendra Modi? More than 17 FIRs were registered for merely putting up a poster in New Delhi seeking accountability for Narendra Modi. Does anybody justify arresting hapless patients when they were seeking oxygen? Sedition charges were leveled and filed against citizens. Do you justify assaulting journalists?
I need to answer that, Gaurav.
Sure, after he completes his point, sir.
Please allow me to complete. Does anybody justify assaulting journalists for covering the COVID pandemic in Uttar Pradesh? This is what Bharatiya Janata Party means. For them, criticism is sedition. I am sorry, I don't subscribe to New India's model of constitution where any criticism against Narendra Modi is seen as criticism against India.
Okay, respond RP Singh.
Understand this.
Criticism of government is not sedition against India.
I would have appreciated, you are a very learned lawyer also. I would have appreciated whether you should have gone through the reason of the case. Even I face cases, Atil, please, even I face cases of defacement in Delhi. When we put poster and Delhi police files cases against us, so it was just a defacement act. And you know the act also. And then I have suffered a lot of cases. I put fine also. I paid fine also for defacement. But that's point aside. The bigger issue and the bigger concern is, sir, who is talking about democracy, sir? Party with general internal party democracy, and I'm saying you every day Rahul Gandhi says something or else about Prime Minister Modi. Do we stop him? No. Is the integrity of the country which is important. When you talk about, when you allow Khalistanis to misuse their platform, when you allow separatists to misuse their platform, that's the issue.
But you must give the Congress party adequate time. You've not been
Sir, I give equal time to both.
Sir, come on,
I did not let RP Singh interrupt you. At least on my show, you shouldn't have this persecution syndrome, sir. Equal time to all guests, sir. But Ambassador Vishnu Prakash, is this about freedom of expression and speech or non-compliance with rules in a democracy? Because India has robust institutions, courts, free press, Twitter, as the government puts it, a US-based company for profit. Is that going to decide what is freedom of expression in India? And how does this spat, in your view, reflect on India globally?
No, that is precisely my problem. I'm not getting into the other aspects of who said what. My problem is very simple. Can the Twitter arrogate authority to itself, discretion and power to decide and to censor or flag content? On what basis does it do it? And then, we know the track record. For 2 years, President Trump did what he did. Once he lost power, then Twitter got into the act. So they are clearly selective. And for Twitter to tell us what is democracy, what is rule of law, is a bit thick. I think and then to decide whether or not they'll follow the rule of law, whether or not they will follow the Indian laws, whether they will station personnel here or not. You see, they are a commercial outfit. They are using India as a profit center. Now, and Indians are the third largest user of Twitter. You are welcome in India, but follow the law of the land. Okay. I mean, you cannot say that I'll follow extreme, I will not, or I'll cherry pick. That is my problem.
Sergeant Povaiya, the specifics that's been raised by government today. Twitter showed Ladakh as part of China. Government of India had to repeatedly request Twitter to have that removed and sorted out. Twitter had content that, according to the government, encouraged vaccine hesitancy, and according to the government, once again, lack of responsibility from Twitter to remove such content, or the case of B1617 variant being depicted or written as Indian variant. Government said remove it. Twitter didn't, according to the government statement.
Yes, let me for a minute. Of course, I'm not here to defend any intermediary or speak against the government, but just look at it from a perspective of what the law says and what any entity which is operating in this country, operating an intermediary platform in this country should do. The law is very clear. It's unequivocally clear. That is the Information Technology Act and the intermediary guidelines and the various rules therefrom. Now, if there is illegal content and if that content is brought to the notice of Twitter, either by a governmental agency or by a court order, the law in this country is that intermediary, without asking questions, must pull it down. If it does not pull that content down, it is no longer an intermediary because it is taking sides in the matter. An intermediary is expected to be neutral and not take sides, number one. Number two, but just look at the enormity of the problem for a minute. For example, on Twitter, we are just talking on Twitter, therefore I take Twitter as an example. Every second there are 6,000 tweets. That is 50 crore tweets a day. Now, yes, if there is a particular tweet that must be taken down and a notice to that effect is issued by the right governmental agency, or there is a court order,
yes,
there is a 36-hour time frame given under the rules. Now, if an intermediary does not comply with it and does not pull it down,
yes,
what should the government of the day do? The government of the day should simply and very quickly prosecute such intermediaries to ensure that the rigors of the law are felt on them and they comply with it.
Okay.
Now, rather than doing that, I don't think we should take the dialogue to a scenario saying, oh, here is an intermediary which is trying to control the country. Now, India is not some banana republic. We are a mighty country. We are a democratic republic. Citizens, it is the job of a citizen in this country to keep the government in check. It is not the job of the government to keep the citizen in check in our constitutional democracy.
Oh, absolutely.
And citizens use platforms which are intermediaries to voice their views.
Sir, the specific points that I raised, I completely take your point, but Adil Singh Boparai, the government's raised very specific points. China, Ladakh shown as part of China. Despite government requests, it had to repeatedly request to get that taken down. Now, is Twitter then taking a stand? Is it not taking the government seriously enough? And then should action not be taken, sir? And the other instances that the government's pointed out.
Firstly, Gaurav, that has not triggered these rules. It is the fear of criticism and public outrage which has triggered these rules. Point number one. Point number two, you have covered the Delhi police. Can you tell me any instance where 20 special cell officers go to a Twitter office or any office for that matter at 9 p.m. at night during the pandemic, knowing fully well that nobody will be there? One has to be naive to think that this was just general policing, number two. Number three, the moot point. Who will decide whether content is objectionable or not? The BJP government cannot decide. It's the courts of the country who will decide. Narendra Modi cannot decide that content is objectionable. What these rules do is that they give unprecedented, arbitrary and onerous powers on the government to determine what content is objectionable and what is not objectionable. Please look at the track record of this government over the past 7 years. Any person who criticizes them is an anti-national. Any person who asks them questions is a terrorist. Any person who seeks accountability is a secessionist. This is not how democracies function.
Respond, RP Singh. Very specific, equally specific charges being leveled by Adil Singh Boparai. 20 special policemen, of course, special cell policemen. If that is not intimidation tactics, what else is, sir?
Gaurav, before that, notices were being served, but the answer was that there's a gentleman who is responsible, but later on it was said it's just a front office, the actual control lies with America. So it's there in the US, not here. So that's the ground reality. But coming to the issue, sir, Congress will always support people who are against can compete. I didn't interrupt it. Adil, I never interrupted you. Okay, you can.
Answer this question.
You can continue, sir. You can continue. I could have interrupted you.
Okay. Gentlemen, one by one.
Are you through, Adil? I heard that you were talking about special cell officers. because this crime has to be dealt, or the complaint which you have filed is being dealt with a special cell, so that's why a special cell is dealing into it. It's not against Twitter. It's just asking them information for which mails were sent, and they never replied. They never thought, they said, we won't answer you. So some way, someone has to reach out to serve them the notice, because they're not replying on the mails. So that point aside. But sir, why do you have to support China? Why do you support all those Twitter handles which are anti-India? I mean, you didn't utter a word on Ladakh not being showed as part of India in Twitter. I mean, because it suits China and suits Congress also. So there's the problem, sir. We are all part of India. We need to fight with any agency, any intermediary, any other platform which is trying to disintegrate or allowing this platform to
before
be used
I
to
begin,
disintegrate the
Ambassador
country.
Prakash, Adil Singh Boparai wants to quickly respond. Adil Singh Boparai, while you respond to this, you said it's courts in India that will decide which material is genuine and which is not. Am I right, sir?
Absolutely.
Then what gives Twitter the right to say something is manipulated media or not, and on what basis? And if the Delhi police wants to know on what basis have they come to that conclusion, how are they wrong, sir?
Gaurav, the constitutionality of these rules will be decided by a constitutional court. We believe that the rules are vague, which breed arbitrariness. But coming to the more pertinent point, I think a time has come in our country where any ruling dispensation cannot hide behind the mask of hyper-nationalism to subvert and suppress its citizens. I think that time has come. The pandemic has shown the wide chasms in our society. I think we as citizens need to decide and cannot allow any dispensation, whether Congress, BJP, any other dispensation, to hide behind majoritarianism and hyper-nationalism to cover up for their acts of autocratic and fascist behavior. This is critical to democracy.
I need to make a very small remark.
Okay, quickly respond. I want to bring in Ambassador Vishnu Prakash for the last word. Quickly, sir.
That's who's talking. 1984, the complete game of majoritism. You killed 3,000 people, butchered 3,006 in Delhi on game of majoritism.
Okay, but again, I'd like to stay on the point today. Now, when the government says protecting free speech in India is not the prerogative of only a private, for-profit foreign entity, Mr. Sajjan Somaya, your take on that? Is Twitter actually trying to attempt to dictate terms to the world's largest democracy, sir?
The clear scenario is that it cannot. And I don't think any intermediary will even attempt that, because please understand, every intermediary has a business model. What is the business model? That they provide an independent platform for people to actually express their views. Otherwise, it is no more an intermediary. The safe harbor available to it under Section 79 will be lost. Now, the minute an intermediary refuses to remain an intermediary and takes position or does not comply with the rules, what happens? The safe harbor is lost. They will be prosecuted, which necessarily means what? Please, for a minute, look at, I've been seeing the debate. I am just a citizen. I'm a lawyer. I don't belong to any political dispensation. But just see the granular debate that is going on. Is BJP right? Is Congress right? Oh, he's sending the Delhi police wrong, or he's sending the Karnataka police right? Now, the answer is this.
But that's not the debate that's happening. I'm sorry. No, Mr. Povaya, that is not the debate that is happening. The debate is very clearly, can Twitter not comply? Can Twitter afford not to comply with rules in India and yet make money in India and claim that it speaks for free speech and it's the only one to do so? But Ambassador Vishnu Prakash,
is no.
The
Even
fear
if it
is
is
today
not
it's
making
Twitter,
money.
tomorrow it could be others. Is this the government's attempt, as the Congress puts it, hyper-nationalism being used as a facade to stifle free speech, sir?
Absolutely not. That is exactly what I said. The debate can't be that there is a political agenda behind it. There is a set of rules. All that the government is doing is to implement the rules. Yes, the government may have different methodologies. Somebody might say the government is high-handed in implementation. That's a different matter. But there are a set of rules. If you are aggrieved by the rules...
But Twitter is not following those rules, sir. What next is the point? Tomorrow it could be other platforms. Is government using nationalism or free speech or all of this as a facade to stifle free speech, sir?
Well, all I know is that the right to dissent, the right to criticism is ingrained in the Constitution of India. It's a fundamental right. But it is not limitless. There has to be a responsibility that comes with criticism. And at times, you and I know that the boundaries are crossed. All I know is that an American media house cannot arrogate the right to itself to decide what is right, what is wrong. We have our courts, we have our system, and there is no democracy that is perfect. I would go with my imperfect democracy than be guided by a commercial organization. I rest my case.
I will let that be the last word on the show. To all my guests, as always, many thanks for joining me on India First.